My name is Stephanie Hofmann. I'm here with Fred and Mary Benoit at their home. It is September 13th, 2017. And we're going to start with our first question, which is why wine?
Why wine? Why not?
Tell your story.
Okay. I'm a physician who was in practice in Eugene, and I had Thursdays off, and all my partners played golf, and I hated golf, so I planted a vineyard, and it came from there. It turned into a winery.
How'd you first get the idea to plant a vineyard?
Pardon?
How'd you first get the idea to plant a vineyard?
Well, my family's always been agriculturally oriented. I have a lot of uncles that had farms, and I spent time on them. So I was always interested in agricultural things. And at that time, I was reading that this was in the early 70s. I was reading that the possibility that Oregon was going to be a good place to grow grapes. And so I thought that would be a nice thing to keep me busy after I retired. I could, have a little winery, and people would come out, and so that. But then after we started the winery, it turned out that isn't a feasible thing. You have to get bigger, and you have to do it more. So we got sucked in.
What can you talk about the first couple of years on the vineyard and starting it from scratch and what that was like?
Yes, we planted our first vineyard in Eugene outside Veneta, 5 acres in what was going to be supposed to be the spring of 1972, and at that time there wasn't available grape plants or rootstock. And Charles Curry and Dick Erath started a nursery operation to raise a lot of grape plants. And basically it was a method where you take one leaf in a supersaturated environment with heat and moisture, that you grow that into a plant. And so we contracted with them to supply those plants with us, and we didn't. And actually, it turned out they were supposed to be delivered in May, and it turned out we didn't get the plants till August, and they were like little tomato plants about this tall. I didn't find out till just recently that the reason for that was they had where they were growing them in a hothouse in Portland, and apparently in the winter they lost power to their heating, and all the things froze. But they never told us that, and so they started over. So we planted in the first part of August, and it was over 100 degrees the day we planted. We were part of a home winemakers group, and so all our winemaking friends came out and helped us plant this 5 acres, and we had to put a shingle over them to keep the sun off of them because it was so hot.
And then watering, remember?
And then we had to water them all by hand every day because we didn't have we weren't set up. So we were able to salvage them, and they actually came through. And we're growing at the time the fall started. But in December of that year was the coldest winter they'd had in Lane County forever, I guess, and everything froze. It was so bad. Actually, in Lane County at that time, there was 800 acres of walnut trees, and all the walnut orchards were frozen out and had to be taken out. So the next year we started over. And at that time, we started with cuttings, which Dick Erath supplied, and we planted at the first planting. We didn't know what grapes to plant, so we planted 20 varieties on 5 acres, and so that was probably fortuitous that they all died, because that wasn't the way to go. So by the next year, it was more evident that Riesling, Chardonnay, and Pinot would be the grapes that would do best, so that's what we replanted. And
Oregon State had a test plot.
Actually, Oregon State couldn't tell us what grapes to plant at that time because they didn't know, and so we also had a test plot for them of about 14 other varieties just to see which was going to do best. And as I say, the answer was that it was really Chardonnay and Pinot and Riesling.
Do you have any other stories of those first couple years on the vineyard?
I'm not sure you'd want to hear them.
She saw the downside.
Yeah, I did. Because we had 6 children, and we were trying to get them through school. All this, you know, that's the downside of being an entrepreneur. So, but we're still here.
After that first freeze, did you guys debate not replanting?
No, we didn't. Fortunately, we didn't do it then.
I knew it was in his bones.
We
He had to do
replanted,
it.
so we replanted with the rootstock, and that everything was coming along really great, and the plants were up about this high in the spring, and in late May we had a frost and everything was frosted back again, and at that point I was ready to call it quits, but Mary
I encouraged
me to continue going, so we tried again, and finally we got that vineyard going, and it prospered, and we didn't really get a crop until about the 7th year, and our first crop we sold to Amie Vineyards, who made Nouveau wine out of it because they weren't really fully ripe, and the first. We started, the vineyard was started in 72, but the first grapes were commercially picked with 79, and those went to Amity, and I think the next year they went to Amity.
Well, we made wine in 79. Remember when the buyer wouldn't buy and the seller wouldn't sell?
It was 77 and 78 that we sold to Amity, and then by 79 we got started again. The winery, because of all the problems we had at that site in Veneta, I thought that I needed to find another site that was more weather friendly, and so we found the property up by Lafayette where the ultimate winery was, and we bought that property in 1979, and had it. It was bare land. The owner of it was raising Santa Gertrudis cattle on that. Actually, he had about 150 acres that he divided into 3 parcels, and our parcel was about 62 acres, and we made the agreement with him and started development and built the road and got a well and started development for the winery. And unfortunately, the seller, actually he had received cash for the other 2 parcels that he sold, and he received so much cash he didn't want to get cashed out again because for tax reasons, and so all of a sudden he didn't want to complete the sale. So we had to stop the development that was going there and get into a legal wrangle, and ultimately we did get the property because we'd already developed part of it and put the road in.
But at the same time, we are selling our house in Eugene because we were going to move up there. And the buyer wouldn't change his mind.
We're selling our house in Eugene, and the person who bought it was someone from Chicago that was he worked on one of the exchanges and all his business was by phone, so he thought since it was so cold in Chicago he could do the job from our place, and he bought the house, made the deal in January, but by the summer he decided he didn't want it. So we had a buyer who didn't want to buy and a seller who didn't want to sell. So we were having all kinds of problems.
Or stubborn.
So in the meantime, we had at our Vinita property, I had built a pole barn, a 24 by 36 pole barn, and in the process of all this development, we had hired a winemaker from Switzerland to come and be our winemaker. And he was coming expecting that we would have a winery, and what we had was a pole barn on the property in Eugene. So we made our first wine in 1979 in that pole barn. It was about 10 tons of grapes that we processed by hand and made that wine. And in the meantime, and so that our development and of the property at Lafayette was delayed for a year, so we didn't get the building built there until 1980. So our first winery in Yamhill County was in 1980. So for a period of time, we had two bonded wineries in Vinita and in Lafayette.
That winemaker, was Max Zellweger. He went to a Seattle winery from, or a Yakima winery from us, and then on to Seattle. I didn't know if you would have heard his name or not. Yeah, I don't know where he is now, but I didn't think he had any interest in anything Oregon. Yeah.
Well, he got a bad deal because he came expecting to work in a winery, and what he found was a pole barn. So he helped us develop, and all the wines he made won awards. He was really good with white wines. His red wine experience wasn't as good.
But you couldn't ripen red grapes at that time in the Willamette Valley like you can now. That's our proof that there is global warming.
In terms of climate change, during the early 1980s, Pinot would not ripen. And so for several years, we had a lot of rosé wines, and we started making sparkling wine, which is made with unripe grapes. And
Nouveau.
Nouveau. And we really didn't start getting good ripening seasons until the late 80s, and then in 90, from 90 on, everything since then has ripened with no problem. So, in fact, we had one of the winery groups that we belonged to had a dinner with a climatologist there, and he thought he was from the University in Ashland, and he said that in 30 or 40 years, the best place to grow Pinot Noir will be the Puget Sound. And that's essentially coming now. At that time, we could not ripen Cabernet in the Willamette Valley because it was so cool. Well, now they can, and so things have certainly warmed up.
So going back just a little bit, how did you find the land not just how did you find, or why did you pick the land in Lafayette? Like, what drew you to that area?
Well, because of my experience in Vinita, I was looking for a hillside. Actually, we had gone to France in 1975, and I bought a book there on what the Burgundy soils are, which was in French, but you could make it out. And when I came back, I asked the Extension Service people what soil series in the Willamette Valley was most like the soils of Burgundy, and it turns out the Willackenzie soil series is the one it's not like Burgundy in terms of having a lot of calcium or lime in the soil, but it's the one that was most similar, had the most similarities to Burgundy. So we were really looking for some land that had Willackenzie soil. And I took the farm newspaper, I can't think, that's published in Salem, so I was looking for land there all the time, and I saw the ad for this, and we went up and looked at it, and it was a west-facing slope that was perfect, and so it had, on the hillside, it had Willackenzie soil. In the bottom part, it was another soil series that wasn't as appropriate.
And it had a beautiful view.
Yeah, it was a 160 degree view all the way around. So that was why we chose that property. It was a piece of land that was 600 feet wide and a mile deep. And it went up with the top of the hill about in the middle and went down on the other side.
Mm-hmm. No, you're familiar with the land, yeah.
Yeah.
So you said that you hired a winemaker pretty early in the beginning. What did each of you do at the winery and vineyard? What did you guys kind of do day to day?
We did everything. Whatever needed doing. We didn't, when we built our concrete building in 1980, and basically our tasting room was just one corner of the cellar. In fact, that table over there was our tasting room table, and Mary ran the tasting room, and
I laid the tile on the bathroom floor.
Well, we had to do it.
We did anything that needed doing.
It was interesting. Max, our winemaker from Switzerland, was very rigid and ordinary, that everything had to be just right, and in their culture, you only have someone who does that do that. You don't do everything. There's no do-it-yourself like in America. So when we would tell Max that we're going to do the drywall or we're going to do this, he'd say, well, you need to get someone to do that. And we said, no, we're doing that. And so we finally found a little plaque that we put on the door.
It's probably still on that door.
I think it still is. It says, no task will be avoided merely because it's impossible.
And then he became an American citizen, maybe 5 years after he left us, probably. And I said, Max, what made you decide to be an American? And he said, because you are so tolerant. We kept saying, yes, we're American, we can.
So I don't know where your question was. Did that answer your questions? Yeah.
So in your opinion, what makes good wine?
The soil and the climate. I mean, each grape is attuned to the soil. That, for instance, the first year in '79, we from our own little 5-acre vineyard, we didn't have quite 10 tons of grapes to make the small amount of wine we made. So we were looking for some other grapes, and there was another vineyard up by Salem, or actually by Corvallis. I can't remember the name of it, and they were selling Müller-Thurgau grapes. And we'd never heard of that, and we said, well, we don't know about that. Well, Müller-Thurgau was developed in Switzerland and is one of the primary grapes of Switzerland. So Max said, well, I know how to do that. So we bought these grapes from this vineyard and made Müller-Thurgau, which is a cross between Riesling and Sylvaner. And it has a lot of the taste characteristics of Riesling, but the growth characteristics of Sylvaner, so it produces huge tonnage without losing flavor. And so when we started the new winery at Lafayette, there was about 10 acres of bottomland that wasn't appropriate for Pinot Noir, and we planted Müller-Thurgau there, and we regularly got about 6 tons to the acre of that, which was. And we were producing about 12,000 cases of Müller-Thurgau a year, and people loved it. And actually, we usually sold out in 9 months, so we'd be out of it for a while until the new crop. So and one of the things was it was best when it was very young and fresh, and so as soon as it was finished fermenting, we bottled it and sold it in November.
A lot of people who were not wine drinkers started with Müller-Thurgau.
Yeah, people would come in and
now
say...
Now they're drinking Pinots, I'm sure.
Yeah, people would come to the winery and say, I don't know about wine, I don't like wine, and then they'd go out taking a case of Müller-Thurgau because it was slightly sweet, and a little bit spritzy, and sort of like Coca-Cola.
Not that sweet.
No, not that sweet, but anyway.
We haven't had Coca-Cola in a long time.
No.
So what was your most memorable vintage?
Well, we won.
We won Best of Show and for the Northwest that time.
Yeah, we won
We were
Best
the
of
second winery to make sparkling wine.
Well, we early on, because of not getting the Grace Drive, we made a lot of sparkling wine, and we won some awards with that. The Governor's Award for Washington. But there was a vintage, and I can't remember which vintage it was. I think maybe 89 or 9. I can't remember. But about before we left the winery, the fair, the Oregon State Fair in Salem had a wine event,
right.
And they had, at that must have been in about '98. They were looking for the best Pinot that had been produced from any winery at any time, and we entered. And I can't remember the vintage. It probably was about '95,
I'd guess,
something like that. And we won with the best vintage for the first 20 years of, and of course
That's of all the wineries who entered. Of course, many
of them
wineries
didn't
put
have
their noses in the air and don't do things
well,
like
and
that.
some of them didn't have that vintage in because it was an
quote
older
me on
vintage.
that.
So anyway, so I guess that, but I can't remember what vintage that was. It was mid 90s, I guess.
And then going back a little bit again, when you first started growing grapes, who did you look for help?
We didn't have any.
We didn't have. I did
We
everything.
had 3 sons helped them. They were in high
Yeah, they-
school and junior high.
In the summer, they worked in a vineyard.
But, yeah.
But that was it, yeah. We did everything.
And when you had questions about the vineyard or something, who did you ask?
There was nobody to ask.
Well,
We asked, oh, go ahead.
there was a vineyard organization, a winemakers organization
Yeah, it was-
that met once a month.
It
or
was
so.
all developing, but nobody had experience.
And that was one organization for the whole northern half of the state.
And, we kept asking the scientists at Oregon State, and because they had never had any experience, they didn't know what to suggest. And so it was sort of on-the-job training to figure out what was best. And with everybody doing things, it sort of eventually came out that Pinot was the best one, and so.
Which is still considered to be true, right?
Were you guys involved over your time in the industry? Were you involved in organizations, wine organizations?
Wine related.
All of them.
Yeah, we were both knighted in Knights of the Vine, the international organization, and I belonged to Women for Wine Sense. Oh, what else did we do?
Well, the Oregon Winery Association,
Yeah.
one of the first meetings we had was in Ponzi's living room, and all the wineries of the Willamette Valley fit in the living
one
room.
person's living.
And the issue was Hillsborough Happy Days was going to have a wine event, and the big issue was whether we should, as a group, should participate or not.
Believe it or not.
And that was...
And we won our first 3 medals at Hillsborough.
We got gold medals from that. For
Happy
the winery.
days.
And then they decided...
That's how primitive the business was at the time. That was about 1981, maybe.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
What do you think should be attributed to the success and the continuation of these organizations through the years?
What contributed to the success?
And it continues.
Stubbornness. It was just something that had to keep growing. At first, you couldn't even get distributors. You couldn't get banks to finance you because they didn't know what was going on. And so until about probably the 90s, the banks wouldn't even talk to you in terms of getting loan for this, and even the agricultural banks. And
we did have partners, financial partners, 3 or 4 different sets of people that through the years that helped.
How did your relationship with other wineries and vineyard owners change as the industry continued to grow?
Change, pardon me?
it changed as it grew. Well, at first, we were all very close together because there were just a small number, and we all shared equipment and experience and so on. But as it got bigger, and particularly as what people with a lot of money came in who weren't do-it-yourselfers, it sort of changed, and then it became more a business.
But some of the people who were the pioneers realized it depended on all of us to do well for it to grow. Like Myron Redford, he was just wonderful. Isn't that his last name?
Yeah.
I mean, he would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it to do something with. So he's a very generous man. Is he still at it? No, I thought I read somewhere that they sold it, yeah.
A couple years ago.
He and Vicki, yeah. No, he's just the one I remember most because he was very generous with his time and his equipment and his advice, and I'll always remember that.
Dickie Rath was too, very helpful.
And what is one of the most important things that you learned from being involved in the industry?
That's a tough question. I don't know. I mean, we were part of something that grew, and then we left, and so.
Well, you reach a certain age, and you don't want to keep going at that pace.
Yeah,
I mean, we had weddings. I mean, we did everything.
It was a 24/7 business.
Yeah. You're a farmer first, and then you make a product, then you have to market the product, then we had 30,000 visitors at our winery a year, plus 100,000 at our tasting room at Lincoln City for a few years. And it's kind of overwhelming after a while, unless you have the money to hire other people to do all those things. So it's a hard business.
Did you guys, because you say that you did everything during this time you had the winery, did you ever expand to more staff? Or did it mostly...
Well, eventually, and particularly when we got the tasting rooms going, we had, for a while, we probably had about 70 employees in terms of well, at the winery we probably had about 5 employees in the tasting room and the winemaker, but our tasting room was in the factory outlet mall in Lincoln City, and it was open 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we had a tasting bar, a wine tasting bar, and a deli and a coffee. So we had a lot of employees there that were, because of several, there were probably 4 or 5 at a time there that worked there, and then because of the long hours there was other people too. So
were you ever there? Let's see, it's a coffee shop, I think.
Yeah,
now.
I think they've turned it. When we sold the winery, the new owners kept that tasting room open for 2 or 3 years, but ultimately closed it, and partly probably because the rent on that property kept going up.
Well, also Mr. Pamplin bought our winery, and he's got, what is his? He has those other stores.
Yeah, he has Your Northwest. Do you know that chain?
One at the airport.
It's sort of like made in Oregon.
I'm not
stores.
sure those are still his, but they were at the
They,
time.
and yeah, I think they are, because actually he was the biggest agricultural operator in Oregon. He had 1,000 acres in Yamhill County and in orchards and berries, and he had 50,000 acres in eastern Oregon. And I don't know what he produced over there. Plus, we were his 23rd business. He had the Portland Tribune is his. He had a radio
Sand and
station.
gravel.
The Ross Island Sand and Gravel, and
He's a remarkable man. He's got several degrees. He's an ordained minister. He's written umpteen books. He's just...
yeah, so anyway.
Whenever you finally decided that you were going to sell a winery, was there something in particular that you were looking for in the person that was going to buy?
Retiring.
Rest.
Yeah, we were looking for retiring.
We were getting close to 70.
We were 70 when we left.
Almost, not quite. 60. I was 68, I think, and you were 69.
Yeah, you know, developing.
We're in our late 80s now.
Developing a business like that, you know, you grow it, but at some point we didn't have anybody in the family that wanted to continue it. We had one son who was a viticulturist. In fact, he worked for me. The three sons worked for me in the vineyard in the summer where it was developing, and he liked that, and he went to the University of California at Fresno, which is a viticultural school, and got a degree in viticulture, and came back in about 1980, I think he graduated, and he worked for us as managing our small vineyard for a year, but that wasn't really enough. And so he saw the opportunity to start managing vineyards and opened a vineyard management company. And at
Probably heard of him, Mark Benoit.
and that was a time when there were a lot of people looking to buy land in Oregon and start a vineyard or have a vineyard started that they could retire to. And so he probably planted 3,000 acres of vineyards in Yamhill County before he died. And as he was doing all this vineyard management, he was buying supplies and things, and so he started a vineyard supply company, which is Oregon Vineyard Supply, which is still in business.
We think that's how he got cancer, that he got into some of the
chemicals that were stored there.
He died of cancer at 43. Left 3 kids, a wife.
So did that answer your question? I'm not sure what your question was now. Yeah.
Since you guys had so many different aspects to your business, the winery, the vineyard, the second winery in Lincoln City, and you've won so many awards, is there a particular thing that you're most proud of that you guys did during that time?
I can't think of anything particular. I think just everything, the whole thing, being part of the emerging wine industry that was important at that time.
It was exciting, really, to be part of it. So. My best day was I spent an entire day with Julia Child.
Can you tell us about that?
Oh, well, she was active in the American Food and Wine Society, and they meet several times a year in different places in this country, and they were meeting in Seattle in June. I think it was on my birthday, and so I said, for my birthday, I want to go see Julia, because I'd been a fan of hers for years. And so I did, and she was on stage with, do you remember the Galloping Gourmet? He was there, and what was the one that ended in disgrace?
Yeah.
The other gourmet.
Yeah.
The 3 of them, and they had quite a discussion on the stage, and the other one, Graham Carr, is that his name? Yeah, he's the Galloping Gourmet, and he was pushing making wine without alcohol because he had some personal inter-family problems with it. And he was trying to get everybody, this whole huge audience of winemakers, to make non-alcoholic wine. Well, it isn't any good. And nobody, not one man got up and said a word, so I did. And so then she came up to me later in the day, and she said, thanked me for speaking up, and she said she agreed with me, and I thought that was worth standing up and saying something. Yeah, that was a neat day. That was my favorite day.
It's a wonderful story. How have you seen the wine industry evolve as a whole, and where do you see the industry going?
Just going to continue to go up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I might be making Cabernets instead of Pinot Noirs, but...
Yeah, as the climate changes, Pinot may not be as optimum here, but that's in the future, so we don't have to worry about that. I think, you know, or you probably know better than we do because we don't keep up with it, but all the big California wineries that are buying the wineries in Oregon, and I've just recently heard that Kendall Jackson has bought Willackenzie, plus another one that they're by there.
You probably know all this stuff.
Yeah, and so now I guess that's the mark of certification that it's a good place when the California people are coming buying vineyards and wineries.
Yeah, let's see, we started in 79, 89, 99, 109. Going on 40 years is from the time we started. That's an amazing
Yes,
increase.
Actually, that vineyard in Veneta, the plants were planted in 1972, and I think they're still producing. That winery, we sold it to a couple who operated it as Hidden House for a while, and apparently they sold it, and they sold it to Meriwether, the sparkling wine producers. And then I don't know what happened.
So you talked about this a little bit, but when you retired, did you expect the industry to grow so much in between then and now?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at the time we left, which was 99, it was just beginning to burgeon, and since then it has just flowered.
But there's still people all over the country that don't even know there's an industry here. It's just amazing. If you travel even halfway across the country, they don't know anything about Northwest wine.
So they've still got a lot of room to grow.
You were saying that there was a story about your name.
Oh.
Do you want to talk about that?
It's your name.
You're good. Well, my great-grandfather came from Canada in 1880, and at that time, as all the immigrants come, they wanted to be Americanized, so they started pronouncing our name Benoit. And as I grew up in Yakima, and that was our name. But when we started producing wine, we were making Pinot Noir, and you can't be Chateau Benoit selling Pinot Noir, so we changed it to the correct pronunciation, which is Benoit.
And so at that time, people didn't know how to say Pinot Noir, and we had to say it so many times. We said, if we keep saying our name Benoit, they're never going to say Pinot Noir, right? So it was easier to change it. We're glad we did.